Hi, I'm Bob Fox, the founder and executive director of Wild at Heart. Oh, back in the late 80s, my wife Sam and I decided to do some volunteer work. We'd always been dealing with house cats before, doing spaying, neutering, and placing. And saw advertisement for an open house at one of the other facilities. That went over, saw it was kind of interesting, thought we might try volunteering there, figuring we'd be dealing with mammals. We knew nothing about birds of prey at the time. But as life turns out, raptors were what we started working with. And gradually we started to learn about them. We ended up with doing a lot of reading, a lot of research. My wife had read a book by a lady up in Canada named Kay McKeever, who's kind of a world-renowned owl rehabilitator. And she was using adult birds as foster parents for the nestling owls. We thought, well, that's a great idea. So the director at the time said, well, next time we get a barn owl in, you can turn it into a foster. It's easier said than done. And a little while later, a little barn owl came in that had been picked up by the wingtips and dislocated both of his wings. He was a disaster. The wings were completely dislocated. He had Giardia, chlamydia, E. coli. He was basically an almost dead bird. And our vets said he'd never survive. He ended up literally having incisions cut in his knees to drain the infections out. For 9 months, we had to tube feed him. And finally, on Christmas Day that year, he ate on his own for the first time. And he became our first raptor. The following spring, he was ambulatory, couldn't fly, of course, but we started getting some nestlings in, and we said, well, let's see what happens. And of course, all the experts say that, males won't foster, but he didn't read the book. And he raised, I think, 12 babies by himself that year. We kept a female. They raised another 2 dozen the following year, and then we got a permanent female partner for him. And they were together for years and years and years, raising dozens and dozens of baby barn owls. And once that started, we started using other birds of prey also, especially great horned owls, and they work really, really well. But at that point, we thought, well, this bird still belongs to the other center, so we need to get our own permits and have him on our permanent possession. And that started Wild at Heart. We still one little bird, and we thought, well, we'll see maybe 30, 40, 50 birds the first year. It was about 200 came in, and it's been uphill ever since. The Brewing Owl Project kind of started as a fluke. We had gotten some nestling brewing owls in, and we're ready for release, and of course Sam says, well, you can't just toss them out and say go find a hole to live in, you need to build him something. And of course my initial response was, yes dear. It's a very common thing around here. So we did some research, looked around and found a site, worked with Game and Fish and Arizona Wildlife Federation, and built a very crude artificial habitat, and it worked really well. And so that was the beginning of it. Then we started getting calls from developers saying, well, we're building this property, there's little owls on there, what do we do with them? Well, at that point, there were no real formal ways of doing relocations. And so we talked to our Fish and Wildlife permits person, and she said, yeah, go ahead and remove them and we'll deal with it, it's okay. So I had to learn how to trap, and that was an interesting process. So we got a couple of calls, and we get them in, then put them into artificially created burrow systems that we kind of developed after doing some more research and figuring out what looked better, what worked better. It's always an ongoing process trying to develop a proper habitat. And as the years went by, more and more calls started coming in, and so Fish and Wildlife finally formalized the process with a special use permit. And so now we're getting calls constantly. The last couple, you'll see anywhere from 100 plus to 300 brewing owls come in through our center through a year. Yeah, the capturing is always an interesting process. Depending on time of year, the birds are either, if they're nesting, the females are easy to catch because they're bound to go into their burrows. Males are always a little bit more difficult because they're very wary of anything around their traps. We use several different types of traps. One is a tube trap that actually goes into the burrow itself and has one-way doors, so if they go in or out, they're stuck in the tube. Then we also use a bow net outside that has lures with live mice, and when they go to get those, the net unfolds over them. So it's a very non-lethal, very safe process. And we're also now using a subdominant male call to attract the males in with a remote trap that we can trigger, when they're in the area. But you have to have a lot of patience. It takes time and effort. Sometimes, you can get out there in 15 minutes, you've got a bird. Sometimes it's 3 days. So you just never know. Once we have the male, that's the main thing, is getting the male. If we know it's a pair, then we'll excavate the burrow by hand to go in and make sure get the female any eggs, any young, or any other adults that are left behind. And that process can be very time consuming. I was out the other night, and the burrow was a little over 23 feet long, and looked like, by the time I was done, looked like a very deep question mark. So you never know which way the paths go, because there's side tunnels. You have to be very, very cautious going all the way through that. Once the birds are brought in, they're housed. We have a band on them so we can identify them. They're housed as pairs or as family units together. We always try and identify males and females, and then they're here for. The process has been varying because we've been changing it as we go along. We've done a lot of research. We're trying to get them out as quickly as we can into new habitat, into single tents where it's just one pair or two pairs at the most, and then where they're fed and watered by volunteers for 30 days. We put the artificial burrows in, and then when the owls are ready, we put a pack side or a net enclosure over that set of burrows, so they're enclosed and are forced to use those burrows. After 30 days, that tent comes off and they're free to come and go. Audubon's been very great by providing a lot of volunteer labor. These processes are very labor intensive. We put anywhere from 40 to several hundred burrows on a site. You want to create good habitat, expansion areas to attract other local birds into that habitat, and to provide habitat for any young that are born there. The pits themselves are dug generally by a backhoe. They're 4.5 feet deep, and then the tunnel comes up. It's about 14 feet long, a little trench that comes up to ground level in a looping design to allow for predator trap and light trap. And then everything is filled in. So there's a lot of work that goes into that. And thankfully Audubon has provided some habitat in areas where they control along the Salt River here, but really provided a lot of volunteer labor, and that's been a big, big help. Unfortunately, I think we're just going to keep getting busier and busier. There's, construction is a never-ending process, especially here in the valley. There's a lot of agricultural land that's still being converted into shopping center homes or roadways, etc. And that's a really great habitat for burrowing owls along the canal banks, etc. And as that continues to go, we're just getting more and more calls. The one really positive thing I must say about the development community is they're really on board with this whole process. They've been very positive about doing the relocation, wanting to do the right thing. So it's been a really good, that's a really good motivator. It's great PR for them. And the one good thing about burrowing owls is that they're a non-threatening species of bird of prey. They're very personable. They're active during the daytime, so a lot of people see them every day. They watch their young grow. So they're very familiar with them. And they see signs of construction, they get very concerned and call me or call the construction people, and then we're contacted. I don't think it's going to really change the habitat that much, because the burrowing owls they live from the plains of Canada all the way down into Mexico. They are migratory to a degree. A lot of northern birds will come into the southlands during the winter months. A lot of our Arizona birds will go farther south during the winter months, but mostly it's females and first years. But sometimes birds that come from the north don't go back. So it's a very fluid, fluctuating population. So hopefully the climate change won't affect us too much, but it's really difficult to tell at this point. It's just the whole concept of doing translocation is something that's brand new. Wild at Heart's program is the largest of any like it in the world. We've done a lot of work with some of the researchers, so we know that the work we're doing is being effective. We're trying to constantly study the process, trying to make it a better fit for the owls. Obviously, this is we don't do this on a fee basis, so we're always looking for those people that care about wildlife to help us out with donations. That's a big thing right now, is getting the funding to do this work. All of us are volunteers. We all give of our time and our energy to make this happen. And it wouldn't happen without the people that are out there that are volunteering and giving their time and their donations to help make this really work.